individual, Hilaire, and behind lay that extravagant freak of French nature, G.K. Chesterton. Pantomime animal with two men in it is a mistake when the two are not very carefully paired. Chesterton and Belloc are so unlike that they get frightfully into one another's way. They are unlike in everything except the specific literary genius and delight in play acting that is common to them, and that threw them into one another's arms. Chesterton and Belloc are not the same sort of anything intellectual, and that is why the Chester Belloc is an unnatural beast, which must be torn asunder to release the two men who are trying to keep step inside its basketwork. And now, what has the Chester Belloc, or either of its two pairs of legs, to say in its defense?
As it turns out, Chesterton agreed with Shaw, declaring that Shaw's clever and happy reference to the two of England's most gifted Catholic apologists was best described as fastidious. If they were so intellectually different, what held them together in their fight against the spirit of the time? Just who were Gilbert, Keith, Chesterton, and Hilaire Belloc? Here is Chesterton's recollection of his first encounter with Hilaire Belloc.
I went to meet Motion Oldershaw at a little restaurant in Soho. A delightful little den off Leicester Square, where in those days a man could get a half bottle of perfectly good red wine for sixpence. To one of these I went to meet my friend, who entered the place, followed by a sturdy man with a stiff straw hat tilted over his eyes, which emphasized the peculiar length and strength of his chin. His eyes, not without anxiety, have that curious distant keenness that is seen in the eyes of sailors, and there was something about his walk that has even been compared to a sailor's. Long afterwards, these words found their way into verse, which expressed a certain consciousness of the combination and of the blend of the nations in his blood. Almighty God will surely say, Saint Michael, who is this that stands with Ireland in his doubtful eyes and paracord between his hands? And on his arm the stirrup thongs, and in his gait the narrow seas, and on his mouth Burgundian songs, and in his heart the Pyrenees. He sat down heavily on one of the benches and began to talk at once about some controversy. He went on talking, and he has, to my great pleasure and stimulation, gone on talking ever since. This was Hilaire Belloc, already famous as an orator at Oxford. As Belloc went on talking, he every now and then volleyed out a very provocative parentheses on the subject of religion. All this amused me very much, but I was already conscious of the curious undercurrent of the sympathy with him, which many of those who were equally amused did not feel. When on that night and many subsequent nights we came to talking about the war, I found out that that subconscious sympathy had something of a real significance. I am an anti-vivisectionist and an anti-anti-vivisectionist. Something in the same mystery united our minds. We were both pro-wars who hated pro-wars. Perhaps it would be truer to say that we hated a certain number of unimaginative, unhistorical anti-militarists who were too pedantic to call themselves pro-wars. Perhaps it would be truer still to say that it was they who hated us. But anyhow, that was the first thing. It was from that dingy little Soho cafe, as from a cave of witchcraft, that there emerged the quadruped, the two-wide-horned monster Mr. Shaw has named Chester Belloc.
Chesterton's biographer and friend Maisie Ward, herself the daughter of a distinguished English Catholic literary family, remembered affectionately his attractive habit
of making us feel that we had contributed something very worthwhile. He would take something one had said and develop it till it shone, glowed. Not from its own worth, but from what he made of it. He would approach a topic from every side, throwing light on those contradictory elements that made it a paradox. He himself had what he attributes to St. Thomas, that instantaneous presence of mind which alone really deserves the name of wit. Asked once the traditional question what single book he would choose if cast on a desert island, he replied,
Thomas's Guide to Practical Shipbuilding.
In talk of his books, G.K. loved to play with words. About controversy, he said,
I believe in getting into hot water. I think it keeps you clean.
about Lenin's oft-quoted remark that religion was the opium of the people, he said,
This profound remark will readily explain the sleepy submission, the supine placidity, the dull and drowsy obedience of the Irish people.
he thought that mission was the only alternative to brute force.
To have things battled in black and white is the only alternative to having them battled out in black and white.
Christopher Morley is also known.
His play on words often led to a genuine play on thought. One of Chesterton's best pleasantries was his remark on the emancipation of women.
20 million young women rose to their feet with the cry, "We will not be dictated to," and proceeded to become stenographers.
Maisie Porter knew that.
each of Chesterton's readers can think of 100 instances of this inspired fooling. But the thing went far deeper than fooling. It has been compared by Mr. Belloc to the gospel parables as a method of teaching and of illumination.
He made men see what they had not seen before. He made them know. He was an architect of certitude whenever he practiced the art in which he excelled. His capital genius for illustration by parallel, by example. That's his particular mark. The word peculiar here is the operative word. No one whatsoever that I can recall in the whole course of English letters at his amazing, but I'll say superhuman capacity for parallels. Now, parallelism is a gift or a method of vast effect in the conveyance of truth.
Gertrude Atherton recalled the conversational brilliance of the other half of Chester Belloc. Of Belloc's speech, she remarked that.
He was as brilliant as ever, and when he monologued, he shed light on every subject he pounced upon, dissected, tossed them into the air where the particles cohered in iridescent bubbles and floated off into space.
Morris Baring, elegant, versatile, unpredictable, and patrician, was a contrast to the Chester Belloc in every way. Yet they became friends for life. Baring's first meeting with Belloc was in Oxford in the summer of 1897, and is typical of Belloc's approach to the world around him.
I had met him before with Basil Black, but all he had said to me was that I would most certainly go to heaven. And so I had thought it likely we should never make friends.
Baring had rooms in King Edward Street, and these were the scene of some wonderful supper. He recalled those halcyon days with affection in his autobiography, The Public Show of Memory.
People would come in through the window, and siphons would sometimes be hurled across the room, but nobody was ever wounded. The ham would be slapped with butter and thrown to the ceiling, where it stuck. Songs were sung, port was drunk and thrown about the room. Indeed, we had a special brand of port which we called foaming port for that purpose. Then again, evenings would finish in long talks, the endless, furious talks of youth, ranging over every topic from transubstantiation to toggers, and from the last row with the junior dean to predestination and free will. We were all discovering things for each other and opening for each other unguessed at doors.
These hijinks seem to have continued among the high-spirited friends throughout the early years of their acquaintance. In his memoirs, Chesterton remembered the adult Morris Baring.
It is not for me to do justice here. The godlike joy of life induced a gentleman to celebrate his 50th birthday in a Brighton hotel at midnight by dancing the Russian dance with inconceivable contortions and then plunging into the sea in evening dress. It were not wholly wise, perhaps, to tell the whole story of a great Celtic party in a vast tent in a garden in Westminster, after which eggs were boiled in Sir Herbert Tree's hat, because it was the most chic and shiny hat of the company. And I remember indulging in a wild fencing match with real swords against a gentleman who was, fortunately, more intoxicated than I. There were many great legends in that circle, the growth of which was amusing to watch. I once smashed an ordinary tumbler at Herbert's table, and an ever-blossoming tradition sprang up that it had been a vessel of inconceivable artistic and monetary value, its price perpetually mounting into millions. From this incident arose the catchword used by many of us in many subsequent controversies. In defense of romantic and revolutionary things, the expression, "I like the noise of breaking glass," I made the refrain of the ballad which began, "Prince, when I took your goblet tall, and smashed it with inebriate care, I knew not how from Rome and Gaul you gained it, and was unaware it stood by Charlemagne's great chair, and served St. Peter at my mass. I'm sorry if the thing is rare, but I like the noise of breaking glass."
It was in this kind of music hall performance that the vaudevillian beast, now routinely referred to as the Chester Belloc, excelled. Here are some examples of their spirited use of language.
Hilaire Belloc's epitaph on the politician himself.
Here, richly, with ridiculous display, the politician's corpse was laid away. While all his acquaintance sneered and slagged, I wept, for I longed to see him hanged.
The pacifist.
Pale Ebenezer thought it wrong to fight, but roaring Bill, who killed him, thought it right.
A bad verse.
William, you vary greatly in your verse. Some is none too good, but all the rest is worse.
And concede.
Tired of love, still more tired of rhyme, but money gives me pleasure all the time.
Chesterton joined in the revelry. Here is his poem, To the World State.
Oh, how I love humanity, with love so pure and privileged, and how I hate the horrid French, who never will be English. The international idea, the largest and the clearest, is welding all the nations now, except the one that's nearest. This compromise has long been known, this scheme of partial pardons in ethical societies and small suburban gardens. The villas and the chapels where I learned with little labor, the way to love my fellow man and hate my next door neighbor.
The Chester Belloc had spouses, and their story of their courtships is worth remembering as well. Elodie Hogan was Californian. Gertrude Atherton described her as
A beautiful creature with hair like polished mahogany, eyes of a dark, rich blue, and delicate, regular features. She had neither figure nor style and dressed abominably. But with a face like that, it little mattered. And she also possessed twin gifts of personality and charm.
Elodie thought she had a religious vocation, and to make things more complicated, her mother did not approve of her environment. What did she think of this unkempt, love-stricken youth pressing his case for marriage? 20 years after their union, in a letter to Father Russell, she wrote,
Years and years ago, I met him. And considering my complete indifference during those days, indifference and virginal scorn for the whole masculine world, I marvel at my insight. For I plainly foresaw all his power, and I realized the greatness of his soul. As he has gone on from year to year, achieving and accomplishing, I have never been surprised. It is only my girlish vision of him and faith in him being realized.
Elodie's mother spirited her away to California, whence her lover followed in hot pursuit. How did the impoverished young man pay his way? He sold all his books, including his signed collections of the works of John Henry Carver Newman, and book steerage to the States. Here is how he traversed it.
I make a good little sketch in sepia of some peak. And this, a lonely fellow on a ranch, was very glad to have, giving me in exchange my supper, my breakfast, and my bed. And I would go on the next day to another and draw another picture and sell it for another loving.
And so he walked to San Francisco. This is Atherton again.
He was not an impressive figure in those days. His hair is long, dusty. His hands and linen were never clean, and his clothes looked as if they had been slept in, which they probably were. But he was a dynamic personality, and his mind was so active and blazing that I was always expecting it to explode and burst through his skull. I still wondered how Elodie could have fallen in love with him. But when he turned on that extraordinary mind of his at full blast, I could have listened to him forever.
But her mother was implacable, and Belloc retraced his steps, feeling as though he had had a vision of
Paradise. And paradise never lasts long.
Though his cause seemed hopeless, even after Mrs. Hogan died suddenly in 1891, Belloc continued to write to her during his successful years at Oxford University. And then, after trying her vocation with the Sisters of Charity for a month, Elodie recognized she hadn't her vocation and wrote to Belloc and told him so. In spite of violent opposition from his mother, Belloc set sail again for the States. When he arrived in San Francisco, he discovered why he hadn't heard another word from her since her announcement she had given up on religious vocation. She was dangerously ill. On finding her,
I went to pieces. I suppose every man does that once or twice in his life.
he had not seen her for 5 years. He had gained prestige, friends, caroused and fought energetic intellectual debate, but he had drifted from his faith. More importantly, he saw that Elodie's personality was formed by and could not survive without that faith. As Belloc wrote to his friend, J.S. Hilaire,
My intense loneliness here, the shock of readjustment after all the wreck of these 5 years, I feel as though I have not understood the mother Rome until these days. The Mass and the sacraments are the same. I tell you, it's like home to me to hear the mumbo jumbo of the young priests and the venerable common sense of the old fathers, and to be able to pray at Our Lady's altar and to find my childhood again. I had no conception till I got here of what these 5 years had been. My soul had frozen. A little more, and I should have done nothing with my life.
Hilaire Belloc and Elodie Hogan were married on June 16, 1896, at the Church of St. John the Baptist, Napa, California, Elodie's birthplace.
Sing to me of the islands or the cool and sing low. Sing to me of the west. Sing to me of goodness and me, and last offspring, and the rest and the rest. Beyond the stream, beyond the end of the water. There lies the land. Sing to me of the islands or the sing to me of the west.
As might be expected, Gilbert Keith Chesterton's first impressions of his intended Frances Blood is, as one might expect, gently teasing, almost whimsical.
She was a queer dog. She wore a green velvet dress formed of green fur, which I should have called artistic, but that she hated all the talk about art. And she had an attractive face, which I should have called elvish, but she hated all the talk about elves. What was arresting and almost blood-curdling about her in that social atmosphere was not so much that she hated it, as that she was entirely unaffected by it. She was intelligent, with a great love of literature, especially Stevenson. But if Stevenson had walked into the room and explained his personal doubts about personal immortality, she would have regretted that he should have been wrong upon the point, but would have otherwise been utterly unaffected.
Was he in love? Here is a letter written at the time to his disapproving mother.
My dearest mother, I am sure you are at least not unsympathetic. Indeed, we love each other more than we shall either of us ever be able to say. I have refrained from sentiment in this letter, for I don't think you like it much. But love is very different from sentiment, and you will never laugh at that. Besides, I am so confident I should like you to find it out for yourself. She is, in reality, very much the sort of woman you like, what is called, I believe, a woman's woman. Very humorous, inconsequent and sympathetic, and defiled with no offensive exuberance of good health.
The elfish humor continued in his memoirs. He proposed to Frances on a little bridge in St. James Park.
This bridge is mentioned in no less authoritative work than Mr. Belloc's essay on bridges.
The time has now come to talk at large about bridges. The largest bridge in the world is the Forth Bridge. That's the longest bridge. And the shortest bridge in the world is a plank over a ditch in the village of Loudwater. The bridge that frightens you most is the Brooklyn Bridge. And the bridge that frightens you least is the bridge in St. James Park.
I admit I crossed that bridge in undeserved safety, but I can assure my friend and the author that the bridge in St. James Park can frighten you a good deal.
Their engagement put Chesterton in a most fantastic mood. In a letter to his dear friend, he wrote,
On rising this morning, I carefully washed my boots in hot water and blackened my face. Then, assuming my coat with graceful ease and with the tails in front, I descended to breakfast, where I gaily poured the coffee on the sardines and put my hat on the fire. Their activities will give you some idea of my frame of mind. My family, observing me leave the house by way of the chimney and take my family with me under my arm, thought I must have something on my mind. So I have. My friend, I am engaged.
Maisie Ward described the wedding as follows.
Conrad Noel married Gilbert and Frances at Kensington Parish Church on June 28, 1901. As Gilbert knelt down, the price ticket on the sole of one of his new shoes became plainly visible. Annie caught Mrs. Chesterton's eye, and they both began to laugh helplessly. Annie thinks, too, that for once in their lives, Gilbert and his brother Cecil did not argue at the reception.
Belloc sent the newlyweds a little verse.
Frances and Gilbert have a little flat at £80 a year and cheap at that. Where Frances, who was Gilbert's only wife, leads an unhappy and complaining life, while Gilbert, who is Frances's only man, puts up with it as gamely as he can.
And in a follow-up letter, he gaily invites himself to their little flat.
It will annoy you a good deal to hear that I'm coming to town tomorrow, and that I shall appear at your apartment at 10:45. You're only just returned. You're only settled down. It is an intolerable nuisance. You hardly wish I had not mentioned it. Also, if you put me off, I shall not have you down here ever to see the oak room, the tapestry room, or the green room, etc.
The Chestertons and the Bellocs began a decade of exuberant camaraderie. Eleanor Jett, Belloc's daughter, remembered these good times.
The Frances and Gilbert came to stay nearby for a few days. Gilbert's father seemed to talk the whole time. We children could not understand one word of Torrent. Father was lying on the lawn with his head pillowed on his arm.
During the ebullient first decade of the 20th century, G.K. Chesterton wrote his literary studies of Charles Dickens and George Bernard Shaw, the novels The Napoleon of Notting Hill and The Man Who Was Thursday, and two declarations that defined heretics and Christians. Belloc, for his part, produced his boisterous travelogue of his walk from Toul, France to Rome in two biographies, Robespierre and Marie Antoinette, a novel, Emmanuel Bernie, and composed some of his initial thoughts on what later became known as distributism, called The Church and Socialism. And And the dedication of his first book contained 2 lines, which quickly passed into some popular celebrity.
There's nothing worth the wear of winning, but laughter and the love of friends.
He scribbled the following verse as illustration of what Chesterton referred to as their fastidious fellowship.
We kept the Rabelaisian plan. We dignified the dainty cloisters with natural law, the rights of man, song, stoicism, wine, and oysters. We taught the art of writing things on men we still would like to throttle, and where to get the blood of kings at only half a crown a bottle.
The next decade brought challenges that would try not only their friendship, but their very soul. It began with what came to be known as the Marconi case. It involved a scandal surrounding the licensing of wireless systems manufactured by Guglielmo Marconi. Chesterton's brother, Cecil, had become the editor of a controversial journal called the Eyewitness. Chesterton recalled in his memoirs that
The object of the eyewitness was to make the English public know and care about the peril of political corruption. It is now certain that the public does know. It is not so certain that the public does care.
in a letter to Morris Baring, Belloc wrote,
The Eyewitness continues to be conducted by Cecil Chesterton, always with vigor, not always with discretion.
Chesterton explained the Marconi case as follows.
The charge against the Marconi ministers was that they received a tip or were let in on the ground floor by a government contractor whose contract was at the time being considered or accepted by the government. In summing up, the judge said most emphatically to the jury that they had nothing whatever to do with the question of whether the politicians had improperly dabbled in Marconi. They were concerned solely with whether the individual Godfrey Isaacs had been unfairly described by the individual Cecil Chesterton. The legend about the Marconi case is that my brother being convicted and fined the rather nominal sum of £100 was a legal answer to the attack on the Marconi ministry.
The decision never dealt with the illegality and propriety of the Marconi issue. And in the minds of the public, Chesterton was proven correct that the illegality and impropriety had taken place. The case concluded on May 27, 1913. The spiral of disaster had only just begun. Barely 7 months later, Belloc fell grievously ill. 3 months later, he wrote despairingly to Baring.
Elodie gets no worse and no better. She can see no one. She can read but very little, and she sleeps more and more ill. I cry and pray God to take her.
Days later, he wrote to his friend Belloc.
I sent for the doctor and the priest. She had great comfort, sacraments. I have sent for the children.
On February 2nd, 1914, he sent the following telegram to Chesterton.
Elodie entered immortality yesterday, a little before midnight, unconscious, blessed, and without pain. Pray God for her, and for me, and for my children.
The last biographer, Robert Spade, tells us that
Her room was closed and never again used during Belloc's lifetime. But as he passed it on his way to bed, he would always pause outside the door and trace upon the sign of the cross. He was only 43. His family and friends rallied round him, but the spring of his life was broken.
at the time Belloc confided to his friend John Philemon.
I must make a third journey, as I took those 2 others in my boyhood and early manhood. For those were to California and in the known world. For this journey, in which I must also do all to succeed, there is no plan and no knowledge in me. The body will, I fear, be strong and will keep me too long to start on that journey.
Barely 6 months later, Europe heard the ominous guns of August that signaled the beginning of the end of the Europe that Chester Belloc had celebrated and defended with humor and passion. The events of the immediate past took their physical toll on Chesterton. Maisie Moore tells us that
His intimate friends have told me that they have seen him unlike himself. that they felt he had come to depend on the stimulus of wine for the sheer physical power to pour forth so much. Then his illness came upon him. Dr. Pocock, coming for the first visit, found the bed partly broken under the weight of the patient.
You must be horrible uncomfortable.
I suppose I am.
The doctor ordered a waterbed, and almost the last words he heard before the patient sank into the coma were,
I wonder if this valley ship will ever get to shore.
The illness lasted several months.
Francis Chesterton kept their good friend, Father O'Connor, informed of the progress of his illness.
November 25th, 1914. You must pray for him. He is seriously ill. It is mostly heart trouble. December 29th, 1914. Gilbert had a bad relapse on Christmas Eve. He is not often conscious and is so weak. The doctor is still hopeful, but I feel in despair. January 3rd, 1915. If you came, he would not know you. If he is sufficiently conscious at any moment to understand, I will ask him to let you come, or I will send you on my own responsibility. Pray for his soul and mine.
In an undated letter, Francis Chesterton wrote to Maisie Ward's mother.
Gilbert is a little better. He asked for me today and hugged me. The recovery will be very slow, and we have to prevent him losing his brain at all.
In person, Francis Chesterton could further confide.
I had tried to test whether Gilbert was conscious by asking him, "Who is looking after you?" He answered very gravely, "God." And I felt so small.
According to his biographer, Maisie Ward, it was at this time that Chesterton's life-changing decision came about.
Presently, Francis told my mother that Gilbert had talked to her about coming into the Catholic Church.
On Easter Eve, Francis told Father O'Connor that.
Jean's mind is gradually clearing. I have told him that I am writing to you often, and he said, I want to talk to him. He repeated the creed last night, this time in English.
On June 12, 1915, Chesterton had gathered enough strength so that he was able to write to Bernard Shaw for his kind letter of concern and to assure him that
Any resumption of my ordinary habit must necessarily include the habit of disagreeing.
to which Shaw replied,
I am delighted to learn under your own hand that you have recovered all your health and powers with an unimpaired figure. It is perfectly useless for you to try to differ with me. Nobody can differ with me. You might as well differ with the Almighty about the orbit of the sun.
when the armistice was signed some 3 years later, there was hope among some that returning soldiers would return and bring with them the courage to overthrow the governing autocracy and restore freedom and sanity to England. And then, on December 6, 1918, Cecil Chesterton died of his wounds received in the battlefield of World War I. Cecil became a Catholic and married in a little Roman Catholic church just before volunteering for the army. He was twice invalided home. He volunteered 3 times for the front, and the 3rd time met his death. Belloc wrote,
His courage was heroic, native, positive, and equal, always at the highest potentiality of courage.
Chesterton mourned the loss of his brother.
My brother, Cecil Edward Chesterton, was born when I was 5 years old, and after a brief pause, began to argue. We argued throughout our boyhood and youth, until we became the pest of our whole social circle. I am glad to think that through all those years, we never stopped arguing. We never once quarreled.
The combat in sickness, the loss of his brother's company, and the unwillingness to hurt his wife by joining the Catholic Church without her, held him back until August of 1922. As long ago as 1907, Belloc had discussed the matter with him, recommending that he turn around.
To our dear lady, blessed Mother of God. My point is, If it is right, she knows. If it is not right, she knows.
Now, as he joined the bowl, he received a confession from his old friend, and the back half of Chester Belloc.
August 25th, 1922. I am, by all my nature of mind, skeptical. And as to the doubt of the soul, I discover it to be false. A mood, not a conclusion. My conclusion, and that of all men who have ever once seen it, is the faith. Corporate, organized, a personality, teaching, a thing, not a theory, it. To you who have the blessing of profound religious emotion, this statement may seem too desiccated. It is indeed not enthusiastic. It lacks meat. It is my misfortune. In youth I had it, even till lately. Grief has drawn the juices from it. I am alone and unfed. The more do I affirm the sanctity, the unity, the infallibility of the Catholic Church. By my very isolation do I the more affirm it. As a man in the desert who knows that water is right for man, or as a wounded dog not able to walk, yet knows the way home. So much for my June contribution, not without value, because I know you regard my intelligence. A perilous tool God gave me for his own purposes, one bringing nothing to me. But beyond this, there will come in time, if I save my soul, the flesh of these bones, which bones alone I can describe and teach. I know, without feeling and not thinking in such a connection, the reality of beatitude, which is the goal of Catholic living.
And as if singing harmony to Belloc's lament, Chesterton, in a letter to Father Ronald Knox, who had offered to give him instruction in the faith, examined his conscience and confessed in the letter his own sins.
I am in a state now when I feel a monstrous sharp, as if I wore a mask and were stuffed with cushions whenever I see anything about the public GKC. It hurts me. For though the views I express are real, the image is horrible, unreal, compared with the real person who needs help just now. I am not troubled about a great fat man who appears on platforms and in caricatures, even when he enjoys controversies on what I believe to be the right side. I am concerned about what has become of a little boy whose father showed him a toy theater, and a schoolboy whom nobody ever heard of, with his brooding on doubts and dirt and daydreams of crude consciousness, so inconsistent as to bear his hypocrisy. And all the more the blank of the lonely mind of a living person with whom I have lived. It is that story that so often came near ending badly, and I want to end well.
If the two carried on their performance as the famous Chester Belloc, the exhilaration and the joy of the battle no longer stoked their fires. It was now an act of courage, an act of will. Their song was as eloquent as ever, but tinged with melancholy. Belloc still raised his glass of wine, but there was a valedictory tone to the verse.
When from the waste of such long labor done, I too must leave the great ennobling sun, and like the vineyard worker, take my way down the long shadows of declining day, bend on the somber plain my clouded sight, and leave the mountain to the advancing night. Come to the term of all that was mine own, with nothingness before me, and alone. Comrade commander, whom I dared not earn, what said you then to trembling friends and few? A moment, and I drink it new with you. But in my Father's kingdom. So, my friend, let not your cup desert me in the end. But when the hour of mine adventures near, just and benignant, let my youth appear, bearing a chalice, open, golden, wide, with benediction graven on its side. So touch my dying lip, so bridge the deep, so pledge my walking from the gift of sleep, and sacramental raise me the divine, strong brother in God and last companion, wine.
And to Our Lady of Chesterton, his last prayer and verse.
Help of the defeated house of gold, shrine of the sword and tower of ivory, splendor apart, supreme and aureole, the battler's vision and the world's reply. You shall restore me, O my last ally, to vengeance and the glories of the bold. This is the faith that I have held and hold, and this is that in which I mean to die.
At the conclusion of Chesterton's book, Christendom in Dublin, there is this lively, lovely final note.
I was looking about for an image of Our Lady, which I wish to give a new church in our neighborhood. It is the glory of the great cult of Mary that she has appeared to painters and sculptors under a variety of bodily types, almost wider than the actual variety of all the living. She has been patroness of so many lands and cities that she has become the center or the prop of every scheme ornament for the school of architecture. But somehow, I felt fastidious for the first time in my life, and felt that the one kind was too conventional to be sincere, and the other too primitive to be popular. So I ended up prosaically by following the proprietor of a famous shop in London to an upper floor on some matter of mere business. The upper room was a sort of a lumber, full of packages and things partially unpacked, and it seemed suddenly that she was standing there, amid planks and shavings and sawdust, and as she stood in the carpenter's shop and asked. I said something, and the proprietor answered rather casually, "Oh, that's just only to unpack." I hardly looked at her. It's remarkable. She was a peasant, and she was a queen. And in that sense, she was a lady. And not the sort of sham maiden who pretends to be a peasant, but that sort of sham peasant who pretends to be a lady. She was barefoot like any colleen of the hills. Yet there was nothing merely local about her simplicity. I have never known who was the artist, and I doubt if anybody knows. I only know that it is Irish, and I almost think that I should have known without being told. I have heard of one other man who felt as I did, and went miles out of his way at intervals to revisit the little church where the image stands. She looks across the church with an intense earnestness, in which there is something of an endless youth. And I have sometimes started, as if I had actually heard the words spoken across that emptiness. I am the mother of God, and this is himself, and he is the boy who will all be wanting at the last.
George Bernard Shaw was perceptive in discerning that Chesterton and Belloc were two very different individuals. It is sad to think that he could never perceive with his sharp and ironical mind that the two had enlisted in Mary's cavalry, had drawn their lances wearing her colors for all to see. They were happy warriors, and their act as the Chester Belloc remained on the circuit until Chesterton was forced to retire from the stage. Gilbert Keith Chesterton died on the 14th of June, 1936. When, in August 1940, Belloc published his thoughts about his departed friend, he dedicated the little book to their mutual friend, Morris Barron.
I am sure your name ought to be connected with any memory of his. So greatly did we admire your work, and so much do you stand for what you and I and he had in common by the end of our various pilgrimages. We share, I believe, also a common and deep respect for his memory.
At the conclusion of his brief essay on the place of Gilbert Chesterton in English letters, he wrote,
In the appreciation of a man rather than of a writer, virtue is immeasurably more important than literary talent and appeal. For these last make up nothing for the salvation of the soul and for an ultimate association with those who should be our unfailing companions in beatitude, the great company. What place he may take according to a lesser standard, I cannot tell, because many years must pass before a man's position in the literature of his country can be called securely established. The result depends not upon him, but upon his country. It may be that his country is in decline and will be unable to learn the great lesson. It may be that this country, which we so deeply loved and so exactly represented, will rise to things even greater than those of its great past. If it does do, Gilbert Chesterton's name will be among the first English names. We are too near to decide on this, but because we are so near, and because those, such as I who write this, were his companions, knew him through his very self, and not through his external activity, we are in communion with him. So be it. He is in heaven.
Upon hearing of the passing of his colleague in controversy, Shaw wrote to Francis Chesterton.
Dear Mrs. Chesterton, it seems the most ridiculous thing in the world that I, 18 years older than Gilbert, should be heartlessly surviving him. The trumpets are sounding for him, and the slightest interruption must be intolerable. Faithfully, G. Bernard Shaw.
Hilaire Belloc, Chesterton's comrade in arms and partner on the stage of controversy, lingered on until 1953. Indeed, they were what Chesterton called fastidious friends, unusual, gallant members of the great company. We are unlikely to see their like again.
Limited now, we always do have a little discussion, first by Dr. Quinn, and then we hope you'll ask some questions, or any observations of your own. Bring it down. First of all, you all know Dr. Quinn, so we don't need to dig into that for a minute. But I have another good watching of the 13 evenings, watching you in front of the board.
Well, I would Father Boys very much my mind, maybe all our minds this year, because this year is the 50th anniversary of the finding the Chesterton Review, and Gloria and I just put it together. And the next issue of the Chesterton Review, which is really about Father Boys, like who will be working for us. So for many years, we kind of sat here and chatted. So his sort of these
And I want to say that one of the staunchest friends of this reading series that we've done for almost 15 years, 13 years, has been Dr. Quinn. And I've been as long as there's a good man, it's hard to find.
well, no, Jim, I thought I heard the very last line of the trainer, Fastidious friend of gallant company, and I think this is a gallant. And calling it Fastidious friend, so the publicity of the company is gallant indeed, and this was just absolutely so many thoughts on the mind. I mean, one of them, I mean, the principle of selection, I mean, the things that you put in, the things that you let out, and when I heard Tully give us that beautiful passage from Christendom of Dublin, and those overheard conversations that Chesterton